On the bustling Rush Street, in the heart of Chicago, Murphy's Tavern was buzzing on another cold winter night. Among tables packed with workers heading home and tourists exploring the city, a middle-aged man watched discreetly from the darkest corner of the establishment. Thomas O'Sullivan, 52, adjusted his Chicago Bears cap and pretended to read the menu for the third time. His eyes, however, never left the gray-haired waitress serving the table nearby. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The woman, appearing to be in her 62 years, carried a heavy tray with only one hand. The other remained rigid at her side, clearly injured. Even so, she smiled at each customer, asked about their families, and recommended the restaurant's famous deep dish pizza with the warm hospitality typical of the American Midwest. Thomas noticed the swollen fingers, the careful way she avoided using that hand, and especially the glimmer of pain in her eyes whenever she thought no one was looking. As the disguised owner of Murphy's Tavern for 3 generations of the O'Sullivan family, he knew every employee, but had never really observed Margaret Kelly. "Anything else, honey?" Margaret's soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. Up close, Thomas could see better. Besides the clearly broken hand, there were deep dark circles and an almost imperceptible tremor in her legs. "Just the check, please," Thomas murmured, feeling a tightness in his chest. As Margaret walked away with a discreet limp, another detail he had never noticed, Thomas made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He needed to find out what was happening to his restaurant's most beloved employee. Why was Margaret working injured, and what dark secret was she hiding? Before we continue to discover Margaret's shocking secret, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to not miss any detail of this true story that will touch your heart. In the small apartment in Pilsen, Chicago's traditionally Irish neighborhood, Margaret Kelly kept her secrets like relics in a locked drawer. At 62, her life was a symphony of sacrifices played in a minor key. Born and raised on the South Side, Margaret had been the devoted wife of Patrick Kelly, a steel mill worker. She had raised 2 children, Sean and Michael, in a small bungalow near Guaranteed Rate Field, where they used to watch White Sox games on Sunday afternoons. But American dreams sometimes shatter like glass in the cold wind from Lake Michigan. Patrick began drinking heavily after being laid off during the economic crisis. The children grew up and drifted away. Sean moved to Los Angeles chasing his dream of becoming an actor. Michael was a more complicated story. After the turbulent divorce, Margaret found refuge at Murphy's Tavern. Thomas O'Sullivan, then a young man who had taken over the family business, hired her despite her lack of experience. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he had said, not knowing he was planting a seed of loyalty that would last decades. Margaret transformed work into sanctuary. She knew the story of every regular customer. Mrs. Johnson, who came every Friday after chemotherapy. Young Miguel, a UIC student who saved every dollar. Lonely Mr. Peterson, a Vietnam War veteran who had found family at Murphy's tables. But now, sitting in her cramped kitchen, Margaret looked at her swollen hand and felt the weight of a secret that threatened to destroy what little she still had. The phone rang. It was him again. "Mom, have you decided about the papers?" Michael Kelly's voice sounded impatient from the other end of the line. Margaret closed her eyes. Her youngest son, now 35, had returned to Chicago 6 months ago with promises of change and desperate pleas for help. He was drowning in gambling debts, a cursed inheritance from his alcoholic father. "Michael, I already told you I need to think." "There's no time to think, Mum. Do you want me to end up like..." "Dad, just transfer the house to my name temporarily. I'll take care of everything." Margaret knew it wasn't temporary. She knew that signing those papers meant losing the last piece of security she possessed, but she also knew that refusing could mean losing her son forever, or something even worse, her. Broken hand throbbed, reminding her of the price of her last refusal. Thomas O'Sullivan couldn't get Margaret Kelly out of his mind. During the following 3 days, he continued his discreet observation at Murphy's Tavern, increasingly disturbed by what he discovered. Margaret always arrived 15 minutes early, not out of dedication but because she walked more slowly. Her clothes, always impeccable, seemed too big. She had lost weight. And there was something in her eyes, a constant vigilance, as if she expected a threat at any moment. "Tommy, you're acting strange," commented his manager, Dave Murphy, a third cousin who helped run the restaurant. "Why do you keep watching Maggie like that?" Thomas had never told anyone about his disguised inspections. It was his way of truly understanding how the family business worked. "Just paying attention to details," he murmured, but the details were disturbing. Margaret avoided serving tables near windows. She kept her phone always on silent and checked messages compulsively. When it rang, she turned pale before even looking at who was calling. On Thursday, Thomas decided to discreetly follow Margaret after work. She walked through Chicago's streets with hurried steps, constantly looking back. At the corner of Ashland Avenue, a black Chevrolet Camaro followed her for 2 blocks before disappearing. But it was on Friday that Thomas witnessed something that chilled him to the bone. Margaret was organizing dishes in the storage room when her phone rang. She answered quickly, trying to keep her voice low. "Michael, I can't talk now. No, I haven't signed yet. Please, give me more time." The voice on the other end was loud. Enough for Thomas to hear fragments. "This isn't a game, Mom. Dangerous people. Do you want it to happen again?" Margaret began to tremble. "Don't do this to me, Michael. I'm your mother. And I'm your son. The house is all I have to offer them." When Margaret hung up the phone, her legs weakened. Thomas saw tears silently streaming down her face as she leaned against the wall, clearly struggling to compose herself. It was at that moment Thomas understood. Margaret wasn't just physically injured. She was being emotionally blackmailed by someone who should protect her, her own son. Thomas came out of hiding and approached carefully. "Margaret, is everything okay?" She turned quickly, wiping away tears and forcing a smile that fooled no one. "Mr. O'Sullivan, sorry, I didn't know you were here. I was just organizing supplies." "Margaret," Thomas spoke softly, using for the first time the paternal tone he reserved for serious moments. "Your hand is still injured. Why haven't you seen a doctor?" "Oh, this is nothing. I fell down the stairs at home. You know how it is, we're getting old and clumsy." She laughed nervously. Thomas knew it was a lie. He knew fall injuries, and those swollen fingers and abnormal wrist position indicated something much more serious. What happened the following Saturday would forever change Thomas's perception of the people he trusted to care for. It was a particularly busy night at Murphy's Tavern. The Blackhawks had won, and the clientele was celebrating with typical Chicago enthusiasm. Margaret ran between tables, serving Goose Island beer and Italian beef plates. When Thomas noticed something alarming, she was paler than usual, sweating despite the February cold, and her hands trembled as she carried trays. Even so, she continued, smiling and asking about regular customers' families. Around 9:30 p.m., Margaret asked permission to get more napkins from the storage room. Thomas, who had abandoned his disguise and now watched openly, noticed she took longer than normal. After 5 minutes, he decided to check. He found Margaret unconscious on the storage room floor, surrounded by knocked-over supply boxes. "Margaret! Margaret, wake up!" Thomas knelt beside her, checking her pulse. It was weak but stable. As he helped her sit up, something he saw made him nauseous. Margaret's blouse sleeve had torn in the fall, revealing purple and yellow bruises extending from her wrist to her elbow. These weren't bruises from an accidental fall. They were finger marks, clear signs that someone had grabbed her arm with brutal force. "Oh, God," Thomas murmured, helping her stand carefully. Margaret realized he had seen the bruises and immediately pulled her sleeve down, her face red with shame. "Mr. O'Sullivan, I can explain." "Margaret, someone hurt you," Thomas said directly, his voice carrying a controlled anger she had never heard before. "Who was it?" "No, it wasn't like that," she protested quickly, words tumbling out. "I fell. Down the stairs, remember. I'm very clumsy. These marks are from when I tried to support myself on the wall." Thomas had grown up on Chicago's tough streets. He knew violence when he saw it, and those marks definitely weren't from a fall. Someone had grabbed Margaret with enough force to leave fingerprint impressions on her skin. "Margaret, in 20 years working here, you've never hurt yourself or had an accident, and now suddenly you're falling downstairs and showing up with bruises that look like finger marks." Margaret began to cry, not the silent crying Thomas had witnessed during the phone call, but desperate sobs of someone carrying an impossible weight alone. "Please, Mr. O'Sullivan, don't ask any more. I need this job. I really need it, she pleaded, through tears. I promise I'll be more careful at home. It won't happen again. Thomas knew she was lying about it won't happen again, not because she was careless, but because someone would continue hurting her. The question tormenting him was, who could be capable of hurting a woman as gentle as Margaret Kelly? Thomas O'Sullivan couldn't sleep. Images of the bruises on Margaret's arm tormented him, mixed with the memory of her desperation to hide the truth. During his childhood on the South Side, he had seen enough domestic violence to recognize the signs, but Margaret lived alone. On Monday morning, Thomas made a decision that went against all his privacy principles. He needed to investigate his employee's personal life. He started the only way he knew how, talking to people in the neighborhood. Mrs. Catherine O'Brien, owner of the Irish laundromat on Ashland Avenue, had known Margaret for 15 years. "Ah, Maggie Kelly," she said, while folding clothes. "Poor thing, she's been going through hard times since that son came back." "What son?" Thomas asked, feigning mere neighborly courtesy. "Michael, the youngest. He came back from somewhere about 6 months ago, saying he was going to take care of his mother. But Mrs. Murphy, who lives next door to Maggie, told me she only hears arguments since then." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. "Arguments?" Mrs. O'Brien lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Maggie has always been an independent woman, you know, hard-working, proud, but since Michael came back, she seems scared. Mrs. Murphy said she heard screaming last week, and then saw Maggie with her arm bandaged." Thomas left the laundromat with more questions than answers. His next stop was Flanagan's Pub, where local workers gathered after work. A bartender for 30 years, Jimmy Flanagan, knew everyone in the neighborhood. Michael Kelly. Jimmy grimaced at hearing the name. That kid was always trouble. His father, Patrick, was a good man before the drinking, but Michael, he inherited all of his father's problems and none of his qualities. "What kind of problems?" Thomas asked. "Gambling, mainly. And when he can't pay, he gets desperate. I heard he owes money to dangerous people. The kind of people who don't accept no for an answer." The puzzle pieces began fitting together in Thomas's mind. Michael had returned to Chicago in debt, probably running from creditors, and now he was pressuring his 62-year-old mother for money. Thomas decided to make one more stop, the Cook County Property Registry Office. If his suspicions were correct, he would find evidence that Michael was trying something related to his mother's property. The clerk, a middle-aged Latina named Rosa Mendez, was helpful. "Margaret Kelly, Pilsen. Ah, yes, here it is. She owns a small bungalow on South Loomis Street for 30 years. Paid off, no mortgage. Has there been any recent movement on the documents?" Rosa checked the system. "Interesting. There's a property transfer request in progress, dated last week. But it hasn't been finalized yet. It's missing the notarized signature from the owner." Thomas felt his blood freeze. "Transfer to whom?" "Michael P. Kelly. According to the documents, he's her son." Now Thomas understood everything. Michael hadn't just returned to Chicago in debt. He was planning to use Margaret's only financial security to save his own skin. And when she refused to sign, Thomas remembered the bruises, the broken hand, the fear in Margaret's eyes. Thomas knew he needed the truth directly from Margaret. On Tuesday, he created an opportunity to talk with her privately, sending other employees home early, under the pretext of electrical system repairs. "Margaret, I need to talk to you about something important," Thomas said, serving 2 cups of the restaurant's famous Irish coffee. "And I need you to be honest with me." Margaret became visibly tense. "If it's about my work performance, Mr. O'Sullivan, I promise I'll improve. I know I've been a bit distracted, but it's not about work, Margaret. It's about your safety." Thomas pulled up a chair to be at eye level with her, a technique he had learned to create intimacy and trust. "I know about the transfer papers for your house. I know about Michael." Margaret's face lost all color. Her hands began trembling uncontrollably, and she spilled coffee on the table without even noticing. "How did you... Who told you?" Her voice came out as a frightened whisper. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you tell me the truth about how you broke your hand." Margaret began crying silently, the kind of crying from someone who had carried too heavy a secret for too long. "You don't understand, Mr. O'Sullivan. Michael is my son, my baby. I can't..." "Margaret, Did your 35-year-old baby break your hand when you refused to sign the house papers? The direct question broke her completely. Margaret buried her face in her hands and began sobbing with pain that came from the depths of her soul. He said they were very dangerous people, she murmured through tears. He said they would hurt him if I didn't help, that it was just temporary, that he would return the house when he got things sorted out. Thomas felt anger growing in his chest like he had never experienced. And when you said no, he went crazy, screamed that I was a selfish mother, that I preferred to see my own son dead rather than help. And then, Margaret unconsciously touched her bandaged hand. He grabbed my wrist and twisted it until I screamed. After I fell to the floor crying, he felt remorse. He cried with me, apologized, said he was desperate, but then he said that if I told anyone, he would disappear from my life forever. Thomas finally understood the perverse emotional blackmail. Michael had broken his mother's hand, and then used her guilt to keep her silent. Margaret, do you understand that this is assault, that it's a crime? He's my son, Mr. O'Sullivan, she screamed, surprising both of them with the intensity. I lost my husband to alcoholism. My son Sean barely talks to me. Michael is all I have left of family. If I report him, I'll be completely alone. Thomas stood up and walked to the window, looking at Chicago's lights. When he turned around, his voice was firm and determined. Margaret, you're not alone, and I won't let anyone hurt you again, not even your son. 3 days after Margaret's confession, Thomas believed the worst had passed. He was wrong. Margaret didn't show up for work on Thursday. On Friday, Thomas received a call that alarmed him. Margaret's voice was strange, too controlled, as if someone was listening. Mr. O'Sullivan, I won't be able to work for a few days. Family matters, you know how it is. Margaret, where are you? Is everything okay? Everything is fine. Michael came home and we're talking about the future. I'll probably move in with him. Thomas had known Margaret for 20 years. She had never talked about moving in with anyone. Something was terribly wrong. That night, Thomas drove to South Loomis Street. Margaret's small bungalow had all curtains, closed, but there was light on. A black Camaro, the same one he had seen following Margaret, was parked in front. Thomas parked discreetly and waited. Around 10 p.m., he saw figures moving behind the curtains. He could hear raised voices, though he couldn't distinguish words. At 10:30 p.m., the door opened violently. Michael Kelly, a thin 35-year-old man with a face marked by addiction and excess, came out carrying 2 suitcases. "Mom, you decided. You're the one who chose," Thomas heard Michael yell into the house. "Tomorrow morning we sign the papers, and you're coming with me to the apartment. I don't want any more discussion." Margaret appeared at the door, visibly defeated. There was a new bandage on her face. Michael had hurt her again. "Michael, please. This has been my home for 30 years. Not anymore." Michael threw the suitcases in the car angrily. "You're going to live with me now, where I can take care of you. It's better than a nursing home, isn't it?" Thomas felt his blood boil. The sadistic strategy was clear. Michael had convinced Margaret that her options were to sign the house transfer and go live with him, or be institutionalized as incapable of caring for herself. Margaret went back inside, defeated. Michael lit a cigarette and stayed in the yard making tense phone calls. "Yes, she's going to sign tomorrow. No, there won't be any more problems. The house is worth about $180,000. That should cover at least half of what I owe. No, you're losing patience, but by tomorrow night you'll have the guarantee. If I can't sell it quickly, I'll put the old lady in a nursing home and rent the house." Thomas had to restrain himself from getting out of the car and confronting Michael at that moment. But he knew he needed a smarter plan. As he drove back home, Thomas realized the complete cruelty of the situation. Margaret wasn't just being financially blackmailed, she was being emotionally manipulated with the threat of total abandonment, and psychologically with the threat of forced institutionalization. Michael had turned maternal love into a weapon against his own mother. This story is reaching its most exciting moment. If you're rooting for Margaret to find justice, leave your like and share this video so more people can see how an act of courage can change a life. Thomas didn't sleep that night. At 6 a.m. he was standing in front of Murphy's Tavern, preparing to do something he had never imagined, directly interfere in an employee's personal life. At 7:30 a.m., Margaret appeared walking slowly down Rush Street. Thomas waited for her at the restaurant door. "Margaret," Thomas called softly, "I need to talk to you before anything else." She turned around, and Thomas saw that besides the bandage on her face, she was carrying a small suitcase. Michael had carried out his threat to make her leave the house. "Mr. O'Sullivan, I'm so sorry, but I can't work here anymore. Michael thinks it's better for me to stay home taking care of family matters." "Margaret, stop." Thomas took a deep breath. "I'm not just a regular customer. I'm Thomas O'Sullivan. My Irish great-grandfather founded this restaurant in 1952. I'm the owner of Murphy's Tavern." Margaret was paralyzed, processing the information. "You're the owner? But why was I disguising myself?" "Because I wanted to understand how my employees really work. But that doesn't matter now." Thomas guided Margaret inside the empty restaurant. "What matters is that you're the most dedicated employee I've had in 20 years, and I won't let anyone destroy your life." Margaret began to cry. "Mr. O'Sullivan, Thomas, I didn't know. I'm sorry for lying about the injuries." "You don't need to apologize for being a victim, Margaret." Thomas served coffee for both with steady hands. "Now tell me everything, from the beginning." And then, for the first time in months, Margaret Kelly told her complete story. She told about Michael returning to Chicago, owing $150,000 to loan sharks connected to organized crime. About the death threats he received. About how he convinced her that signing the house transfer would be saving him. He said if I didn't help, they would kill him. And then he said if I told anyone, he would disappear forever, and I would be left not knowing if he was alive or dead. Thomas felt a mixture of anger and compassion. "Margaret, your son broke your hand, emotionally blackmailed you, threatened you with a nursing home, and now made you leave your house. This isn't love, this is abuse." "But he's my son," Margaret whispered, the phrase that had become her mantra of self-justification. "And you're a person who deserves respect and dignity, regardless of who your son is." Thomas stood up and walked to his office in the back of the restaurant. He returned with a business card. "This is my personal lawyer, Patrick Donnelly. He specializes in family abuse and financial fraud cases. And this," he showed another card, "is Detective Maria Santos from the Chicago Police Department's Crimes Against the Elderly Division. Both are people I trust completely." Margaret looked at the cards with trembling hands. "Thomas, I can't afford lawyers. You won't pay anything, I will." "Why? Why would you do this for me?" Thomas sat next to Margaret, his voice loaded with honesty she had never heard before. "Because in 20 years observing this restaurant, you were the only person who treated every customer, rich or poor, young or old, with the same genuine kindness. Because you know the names of every regular customer's children. Because you saved part of your salary to help young Miguel pay for college, even without him knowing it was you." Margaret was shocked. "How do you know that?" "Because I was paying attention, and because people like you are rare in this world. I won't let your son destroy that." "Margaret, you have a choice to make now. You can continue being a victim of someone who uses your love against you, or you can fight for your dignity." Margaret closed her eyes, and when she opened them, Thomas saw something he hadn't seen in months: determination. "What do I need to do?" Thomas's plan was simple but effective. Confront Michael on neutral territory, with witnesses and legal support. They scheduled the meeting for Saturday night at Murphy's Tavern after closing. Patrick Donnelly, the lawyer, arrived first, a 50-year-old. Irish-American with experience in family abuse cases. Detective Maria Santos arrived next, discreetly dressed in civilian clothes but with visible authority in every movement. Margaret was visibly nervous, sitting at a back table with Thomas beside her, offering moral support. At 8:30 p.m., Michael Kelly entered the restaurant carrying a folder with papers. "Mom, why did you arrange to meet here, and who are these people?" Michael looked suspiciously at the strangers at the table. "Michael," Thomas stood up, "I'm Thomas O'Sullivan, owner of this restaurant and your mother's employer for 20 years. Michael seemed confused. "Okay, so what? This is family business." "Family business?" Patrick Donnelly introduced himself. "I'm a lawyer specializing in crimes against the elderly. Physical assault and financial coercion are federal crimes, Mr. Kelly. Michael's face changed completely. Arrogance gave way to panic. What are you talking about? I never… Michael… Margaret spoke for the first time, her voice firmer than Thomas had heard in months. I told them about my broken hand, about the bruises, about the nursing home threats. Michael exploded. Mom, you don't understand. These people are going to kill me if I don't get the money. Do you want your son to die? And do you want your mother to live on the street? Detective Santos intervened coldly. Because that's what happens when you steal an elderly person's house. I'm not stealing. She's my mother. She can give me the house if she wants. After breaking her hand when she said no, Thomas asked, his voice loaded with controlled contempt. Michael looked around, realizing he was cornered. He changed strategy, turning to emotional manipulation. Mom, please. He knelt beside Margaret, tears in his eyes. I'm your baby. Do you remember when I was little and you promised you would always protect me? I need your help now. Margaret began to cry, her maternal heart fighting against reason. Michael! She remembers, yes, Thomas interrupted firmly. She remembers taking care of you when you had fever, working 2 jobs to pay for your school clothes, staying awake all night when you were sick. And what did you do in return? You broke the hand of the woman who gave you life. You threatened to put her in a nursing home. You stole the only home she has. Michael stood up furiously. You don't understand anything. I'm going to die if I don't get this money. And your mother will die slowly if she continues being abused by you, Detective Santos responded. The difference is that your choices put you in this situation. She didn't choose to be beaten by her own son. Margaret stood up slowly, looking into her son's eyes. Michael, I love you. I always will. But I won't let you hurt me anymore. Mom, no. The threats end today, she said, surprising everyone with her firmness. You're going to seek help for your debts and your problems, but not using my house as payment. Michael Kelly tried one last desperate manipulation. Fine, Mom. You chose strangers over your own blood. When they find me dead in some alley, remember that you could have saved me. He headed for the door, expecting Margaret to run after him as she always did. This time she remained seated. Mr. Kelly, Detective Santos called him before he left. You have 2 choices now. You can seek legal help for your debts through the city's social services, or you can be arrested for assault against an elderly person, attempted financial fraud, and coercion. Michael stopped at the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. And if I choose help? Patrick Donnelly stepped forward. There are protection programs for people in debt to loan sharks. It's not easy, but it's legal. And it includes mandatory therapy for gambling addiction. For a few seconds, it seemed Michael would consider the offer. Then his expression hardened again. You destroyed my family, he spat the words with anger. My mother will regret this. Detective Santos stood up. Mr. Kelly, that sounded like a threat. I need you to come with me to the station. As Michael was escorted out, Margaret collapsed in tears. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, as if a gigantic weight had been removed from her shoulders. Did I do the right thing? She asked Thomas. You saved your own life, Thomas replied, offering her a tissue. 3 months. Later, Margaret Kelly was unrecognizable, but in a wonderful way. The bruises had disappeared, her hand had healed completely, and most importantly, she was truly smiling again. Thomas had fulfilled a promise he had made silently. Not just protect Margaret, but also give her renewed purpose. He offered her a promotion to assistant manager of Murphy's Tavern, officially recognizing her dedication and knowledge of the business. Margaret, in 20 years, you've known every customer who passed through here. You know their tastes, their stories, their families. This isn't just a talent, it's a gift. Margaret now trained new employees, organized special events at the restaurant, and had become the unofficial mother of the entire team. Her advice was sought by young waiters who saw in her the wisdom and kindness that had always been there, but could now flourish without fear. Michael had agreed to enter the protection program after spending a night in jail. The process would be long: therapy, gradual payment of debts through supervised work, and mainly treatment for gambling addiction. Margaret received letters from him occasionally. Letters of genuine apology for the first time in years. She responded with love, but also with clear boundaries. He would always be her son, but would never again be her victim. On a spring afternoon, Thomas watched Margaret serving a table of tourists, patiently explaining the difference between deep dish pizza and Chicago's tavern-style pizza. She laughed at a joke one of the customers made, and Thomas noticed something he hadn't seen in months. Margaret was genuinely happy. "Mr. O'Sullivan," she approached after the customers left. "Thank you for everything." Thomas smiled. "Margaret, you were always extraordinary. You just needed someone to remind you of that." And for the first time in decades, Margaret Kelly walked through Chicago's streets with her head held high, knowing she deserved all the respect she received.